Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 612, Red and Blue Hoodies for Everyone. For Monday, November 9th, 2020, it's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norp. Thanks for joining us. Well, the U.S. election is over, and marketers have some big questions to answer. Like, will a Biden win help or hurt holiday sales? Or will uncertainty over what Trump will do next create marketplace anxiety? And how does the general division in the country impact long-range planning? Tonight we'll discuss all this and more. Also, 2020 trends that aren't going away, surviving a second lockdown, the hotel as office positioning, plus this week's fair, fail, foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the author of 5 books, including Zero and Built to Suck, as well as the host of Corona TV, author, speaker, consultant, Mr. Joseph Jaffe. Hi, Joe.
Hi, I'm excited to be here, and I heard there's an election coming up in the US, so that's going to be awesome.
You have been asleep, my friend. And finally, we welcome another legend of the marketing world on the program, the longtime digital prophet at AOL, who now consults with brands around the world. Mr. David Shing joins us. Hey, David.
Yeah, g'day, Bob. Nice to be here with you on this glorious Sunday night.
I know, a lot of good stuff happened, but we won't get into that right away. Oh, wait a minute, we are going to get into that right away. Apparently, there was a little bit of election news this past week. And I know it will be hard not to have this whole conversation devolve into some kind of political diatribe, but I'd love to look at how all this will affect the marketing world, Joe. So first, let me ask you this. Will all the ill will and division take a toll in the immediate future and possibly derail holiday sales? I mean, what's your take on that? And particularly, will the Biden win give any advantage or disadvantage to retailers out there trying to market their products for the holidays?
Well, Bob, I was busy binging the election, and now you've just told me how it ends.
You TiVo'd it. Is that what you're saying? You DVR'd
it. So in reading some of the source articles, I saw a couple of interesting things. One is 81%, and this was obviously a study that was done before the election. 81% of, self-described liberals said their habits would stay the same regardless of the outcome of the election, compared to 78% of conservatives. So, how do we interpret that? We interpret that based on the fact people still brush their teeth and buy soap and clean dishes. That might be one way to look at it. The other way to think about it, and I thought this was a great quote. It said, "We're still talking to people at the shelf, not the voting booth." So certainly, the idea of people still buying stuff and and markets continuing as they were makes some sense. The other one, which I find to be a little bit more intriguing, is this idea that marketing has always thrived. Mass marketing and brand marketing, certainly marketing heralded by mainstream media, television advertising and such, was always based on trying to be all things to all people. But the danger, of course, is if you try and appeal to the mass, right, to the general populace, and you try and be all things to all people, you end up being nothing to no one. And we may end up talking, I'm sure, about Gap at some point in the show. So I'm
We
reminded
we brought that subject up last week, and it was really kind of an amazing debate. But so I don't want to rehash it. But the idea that a brand can come out there and say to its audience, "We're all in this together, red and blue." It's just not the way the world works right now. You can't do that. You're just going to piss off half your audience, at least, if not both sides of your audience.
Just to offer 2 quick points on that for a second. One is, it just seemed like an ad, right? It was messaging as opposed to product marketing. And if you look at the product, 50% red, 50% blue. Well, 50% of the population is going to think, well, that sounds like a great idea, reconciliation. Guess what? They're the winners in this election. And 50% are probably, over my dead body or maybe over your dead body. And those are probably the losers.
I would actually challenge that. I would say that it's probably not 50% is for it and 50% is against reconciliation. I'd say it's closer to 90% are about get in line where, we've got the right way to go. I mean, there is no reconciliation coming. You hear the reconciliation speech from the victors right now, but you're not hearing it from the masses. I mean, it's just like a massive party and a massive FU to the outgoing administration. I mean, this is like there is absolutely no love lost between those who are on the Trump side and those who are on the Biden side. And that's going to cause some real headaches for marketers trying to go out there, because it's just like, if you've taken a position, you've alienated half your market. If you go ahead.
Can I suggest a slightly different view, which is, if you look at a brand like Gap, who needs a ton of help anyway, maybe you could say, wow, what a great way to try and set a cat amongst their pigeons in a brand that sort of needs some oomph anyway. And I would say that's completely naive. Because at the end of the day, they knew what they were doing, and being contentious, I think, is probably the way forward for that brand. Because let's be remembered that they did a piece with Kanye, and they're doing a collaboration with him. But at the same time, they dropped another sort of, amazing young designer of color, and it's completely. I think it's just about them trying to be disruptive and completely losing the concept of whether they choose or not. By the way, if you did say that they were super smart, having a sweater that's cut down the middle 50-50, it's pretty close to alignment with the election anyway. So, either way you take it, it's pretty amazing. So I would say, if they didn't do something like that, guys, we would not be talking about Gap. They're a challenger brand already, and they have to be desperate, and they acted like it, in my opinion.
So you're saying that it was a good move on their part. And how about other brands that are trying to do that kind of positioning where, come on, we're all together, we're one nation, let's look past our political differences? I think that's naive. I mean, I think that a brand has no place saying that, and that the hard work of reconciliation, of actual reconciliation, is not a dismissal of everybody's hard fought and hard won positions on political issues. I mean, you've got to somehow reconcile.
I agree, mate, but I'm not suggesting that they're trying to unify. I'm suggesting they're trying to be contentious and taking a position, because their brand is a challenger already anyway. So they have no choice but to try and be confrontational. And they didn't do it by taking a position. They're doing it by taking a position of unity, which I think is kind of the unposition, which is just predictable.
Yeah, that's
and look, I got my math wrong. What should have happened is 48.611111 recurring one should have been red, and 51.3999999 should have been blue. So, my bad. I've always been more of a right brain thinker, but
we'll make the tassel and the zipper blue, and that'll take care of it.
Yeah. Look, I think the problem with a and it's not just Gap, right? Because you contrast Gap with Patagonia, with Nike, with Ben & Jerry's, with Lush. Jeffrey Hazlett, who was on Corona TV about a month ago, I just remember his words so clearly. He said, "Pick a side. Just pick a side."
Yes.
If you're straddling the fence, and if you're stuck in the middle, if you're in limbo or no man's land, you're going to get absolutely skewered. It's almost like the the analogy of the bulls and the bears make money and the pigs get slaughtered. So it's like you got to pick a side.
I would caveat that. I don't know that you need to pick a side. You could just shut up and not get involved at all, because that's what.
But that's a side.
Yeah.
That is a position. It's just having a position and having that confidence and that self-awareness. Look, just very quickly on the Gap example, what they could have done, what they should have done perhaps, was to say 100% of the proceeds of the sale of this hoodie will go towards, if they really wanted to be smart about it, 50% of it could have been funding the police and 50% could have been defunding the police. I mean, they could have figured out a way to say, this is not about, if you think this is about short-termism or opportunism or about making money in this particular case, you're wrong, and we're going to put our money where our mouth is. That could have been one way to at least have staked that, to Shingi's point, that challenger position, to say, yeah, we're going to disrupt, but we're going to kind of stand by our position and we're going to back it up with action.
But Joe, that would have required them to actually have a strategic plan around a contentious moment. And I don't even think the sweater's available, right? So at the end of the day...
Details, right?
If you think about it, at the end of the day, I think it was like, hey, here's an idea. Why don't we just throw this out and see what's up? But hey, look, something that they did I thought that was really kind of interesting about 4 years ago is they did have an interesting creative director who decided to crowdsource, at least to see what the audiences thought, crowdsource an opinion on designs. And they literally said, hey, do you dig it or don't dig it? Because if you do, we're going to do it. And I thought that was a really nice sort of forward-thinking, okay, these guys aren't just taking the catwalk position and saying, we're going to be the curators of incredible couture, which is exactly not how you think about Gap, but they're actually going to the audience that does care about them and saying, what do you think about it? And I thought that was a great position. The sweater thing, I'm telling you, man, or the hoodie, I guess they call them here, at the end of the day, that jumper is lost in the woods. It was just a contentious position by saying, let's just see if we can get a set a cat amongst the pigeons by taking a non-position. And I think I don't know, man, it gets too much airtime. It's also
I mean, there is some value to the thought that all PR is good PR. Getting mentioned, the fact that we're discussing it, this is all positive for the brand potentially. But I don't know that that's always the case, especially not in such a contentious situation. There was a really interesting article I included in the packet. I don't know if you read this one, but I mean, it was talking about marketing strategies as a whole. And it seemed to take the position that marketing strategies shouldn't adjust, that we have the same strategies we always have with markets, and we need to keep focused on those and not try to monkey around with new strategies that just accommodate the election or accommodate politics right now. I mean, David, what do you think about that? I mean, is that a reasonable position? Is that something that makes sense for most brands?
Absolutely not. If you want to become a forgotten brand, stick in the middle. Stay in the tried and true path that you've been on. To Joe's point, look, it's truthful. You either want to be loved or hated. But to be stuck in the middle means you're going to be forgotten about. So you're going to have to do things that are really quite interesting, right? So look at somebody like Fernando over at Burger King. If you look at what those cats have done, particularly in the time, forget politics for a moment, but just think about a pandemic. What they've done over this time period has been really kind of, one, future forward in the way that they think, by being, what they did in France by saying, here are all the ingredients to make a Whopper that you can buy at your local store. It may not be as good as ours, but we're going to give you the secret sauce to try and at least get there because we can't get you there. Or what they did recently when they said, buy from McDonald's. Everybody's hurting. We have other people who produce products and they need to be consumed, and we want you to help them out as well. And we thought we'd never say that, but we're in the community of humans. I think that, in my opinion, is a really nice way to say this brand is super buoyant. And they would have, they've done some things that are super innovative in the past, but they also understand that they need to think about the role of marketing is not just to sell product, but it's also to understand how to position a brand in the future. They've got the Impossible Burger as a Whopper. Their main constituency probably doesn't buy that product, but they sure as heck are trying to move to a world where it's not about, all of the issues that manufacturing meat creates. And they're trying to say, hey, plant-based is the way of the future, and we're going to take a position now, even if it doesn't. Even if it costs us money.
I see where you're going with this. I see where you're going with this, but it's taking a position and holding firm to it is one thing. Taking a position and holding firm to it when you're talking about politics, it seems like it's a stupid choice for any brand to get involved with it, unless your brand specifically is a political brand.
Oh yeah, no, I completely agree with politics. Yeah, I mean, I think you'd have to kind of, well, no, it really depends on the bullseye of politics, red or blue, maybe, but definitely the ethics around it. So if a brand didn't stand up for whether they believe or not believe in BLM, for example, I think that's kind of a weak position. If you didn't actually stand up and say, we support, this is not just this is a human rights issue that's been going on forever.
Yeah, and I would caveat that and say, yeah, that's not a political issue. I mean, people try to turn Black Lives Matter into a political issue, but it's not a political issue. It's totally a human rights issue, like you said. So that's a legitimate thing for a brand to weigh in on and say we support, this position. But when you're talking about, politics and whether or not Trump should have been elected or whether Biden should have been elected, I mean, wading into that territory only makes sense if your brand is already very politically motivated. If you
exactly, which again was like Ben and Jerry's or Nike or Patagonia. But I've decided to coin a new term because I'm inspired by Shingy being here, which is the word is opportunism, right? So that is opportunism, but with a humanity bent. And
you're clever.
With respect, and with respect to what Burger King did, was it a PR stunt? Who cares? Who gives a damn? There's something that is so human about it, and it benefits. People win at the end of the day, and that's what we need to see more of. I spoke about action. That if Gap had done something in addition to just saying, here is this gimmick, because that's really how it came across. And that's what we need to see. We need to see companies, because unfortunately, this whole subject is just the next chapter in brand blunders, which began with we're all in this together, and then it became Black Lives Matter, and then it became, hey, we're open, good news, we're open again, life's back to normal. Well, it isn't, and it's not going to be for a long time. And now brands are doing it again. And I mean, I heard this on your show, Bob. I think it was, Saul Colt maybe who said it. But the most important thing for brands to be doing right now is listening and just keeping quiet for once in their godforsaken lives, And look, there are a lot of things that are going on. A lot of industries are going to be impacted. I think part of this particular subject in the show notes was talking about what are the implications now with a Biden presidency with respect to media, with respect to big tech, with respect to M&A, with respect to the news channels. It's not just consumer packaged goods and their agencies. It's tons and tons of verticals that are going to have to face the music, and by the music I mean Elizabeth Warren, to basically say the way that we've acted over the last 4 years or even the last 40 years is not necessarily going to be the way that we're going to need to be, or that we will be required to act moving forward.
But if you think about it, Joe, to add to your point, I think that's interesting over the certainly pandemic, outside of politics, just for a moment. There was kind of a hold your breath moment, and there was some listening. And simply you saw that because the media buying went away. And if it did go anywhere, it went to PSA ads on television. But what is interesting is that even with politics, if you are reflecting cultural change as marketing, and you're doing it in a way that appeals to the customer that you care about, and you can do it in a way that makes them feel comforted, let's say, then I think it actually is a really interesting way to position. Take somebody like Guinness. I mean, they just did this wonderful piece, I think it was around St. Patrick's Day. Don't quote me on that, but it was around that time, and I think it was in March. And it just, they just came out and said, hey, we signed a 9,000-year lease on our brewery or something. And I thought to myself, wow, these guys are really wanting to get back to, they're going to be here for forever. And they had this ad. I don't know if you guys saw it. They did a print ad, I think it was. That was just this sofa in a tan color that looked like the head of a Guinness beer. And it just said, stay at home. So I do think in the culture of, forget we're all in this together. I think that's kind of a cliche, but the stay home piece, I thought brands had a creative field day, and it was fantastic to see how brands would take their own brand and sort of reinforce that message in a way that comforted the constituency. Whether it was Audi taking their four rings and separating them, Mercedes-Benz doing the same thing with their TriStar, or, you know, Burger King again. I don't know. I'm a fan of them, but they did this incredible piece on the side of a store. It just said "Stay home" as opposed to home of the Whopper. So it did allow people, I think, these brands to sort of think about, hey, how do I empathize, to your point, Joe, which is the word that I've heard so much recently when I speak to CMOs. It's all about empathy, not sympathy, because it is all about a different type of alignment. How do they actually take the core of their brand and make people feel super confident in a way that feels like, oh, by the way, this is still on brand. Don't forget that we're here, sure, but we're going to do it in a way that's different. So if it's quirky, like KFC did in UK, where they stalked a bunch of people by saying, can you make our 11, secret herbs and spices in your own version? And people were trying to sort of recreate KFC chicken, and it looked horrendous. And they really played that out. They just said, hey, nice try, but why's your chicken got dandruff? And it's just a really kind of, for this picture that had this sort of weird fluffy white stuff on it. And just, it was a really interesting way of saying, we want to be here and help in ways that make you feel like, the number one thing is comfort in my mind. Just to make people feel like, okay, we're good.
I want to get back to the original question, because I feel like we've had a really super interesting conversation about how brands are dealing with the adversities that they're facing right now. But what I want to get to a definitive answer from you guys, what you believe is, did the U.S. election change brand marketing? Did it make it harder for brands to proceed going forward, or do we fall back into old patterns in a matter of months? I mean, what do you guys think?
Well, look, I think the problem is, okay, not to go back into a circular discussion, is it's very hard. Again, probably 48.6%, whatever the statistic is, would disagree with me. But it's very hard to take COVID out of the conversation. It's very hard
yes, absolutely,
to separate it and isolate it. But let's just talk for a moment to answer your question about the election itself. One of the things that comes out of this election, if in fact Joe Biden's platform and it makes sense for this to be his platform, is how do we heal? Can we heal? Can he be, the healer in chief? Well, any brand that promotes essentially healing, and I know that sounds a little almost fluffy, but there are some pretty strong and severe implications. And I'll give you an example. And this was in one of the source articles. Twitter, only about a week from the election, decided to actually start to label and caveat tweets from anyone that was, representing, let's call them alternative facts, shall we? And it so happens that pretty much all of that was coming from Donald Trump. Now, I'm trying not to be political, but I took a screenshot the day after the election of Trump's tweets. 6 out of the 11 were either completely blocked or caveated, and I was just blown away. And I thought to myself, too little, too late, ? Or is this going to be the responsible face of big tech, of social media platforms, of media companies, including, by the way, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, moving forward, where facts need to be backed up and where opinions are clearly disclosed as such. And we have the tools, we have the technology, we have AI to make sure that if in fact we are going to heal this country and come together and unite and avoid civil war, whatever the case may be, then these companies are going to need to be accountable. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the administration will hold them accountable. And so what am I talking about? I'm talking about regulation. No big business wants to ever hear the R word, but it's going to be coming, especially if it promotes, the North Star, which might be healing. So that might be a very interesting implication, and brands have to push into that.
Joe, I think that's a really great position. But I would also say, to your point, Bob, the question you're asking, that's very pointed, is that if brands reflect back cultural changes marketing, they will win. So it all depends on whether it's true to their brand. That's what I think is going to happen. So here's what I do think will play out in the next 90 days. It'll be a lot of exhaling, a lot of empathy, lots of sort of wonderful, euphoric moments. But then as brands and as brand marketers will fall back into behavioral patterns of the past, and although there'll be a government change and there might be some change with some of these platforms, which, I'm in the camp of little too late, at the end of the day, the places where media is positioned will fall into those habits again, I think. So I think the smart businesses who are positioning themselves for a longer play outside of politics and pandemic are actually trying to figure out how transformation can work and understand that this is a longer play than politics and pandemic.
The source article, one of the source articles actually spoke, and it was I think it was well articulated that there's going to be a skew to the left, but not a major or dramatic skew, but for the most part you're going to see a skew to the left. And what that means is, with respect to things like diversity and inclusivity, you're definitely going to see a heightened awareness to that from a messaging standpoint and a marketing strategy standpoint. I will say, part of a series of interviews that I did do on Corona TV, which was to interview 9 CMOs, and these weren't just any CMOs or COs. These were people like Essie Bracey from Unilever, Mark Pritchard from P&G, Ivan Pollard from General Mills, Deborah Wall from General Motors. I mean, I'm not name dropping, for
you kind of are, but that's okay. We love you for it.
But I'm not doing it for selfish purposes. I'm doing it to actually, or for self-promotional purposes. I'm doing it to indicate every single one of them I was actually quite surprised how, outward, how outspoken they were, how explicit they were, and actually how much work they were doing and how they were committed to the cause. It didn't seem like spin. It didn't seem like this was just lip service or superficial, kind of just talking over the point. I was really blown away, to the point where, I still remember, Essie Bracey at Unilever said one of the initiatives that they've, I think it's called the Crown Project, that, African American kids are discriminated against at school because of their hair, because of how they wear their hair. Shingy knows what I'm talking about because his hair's, that was just a joke, Shingy.
I get the discrimination.
But it's unbelievable to think that people could come, that kids could come to school and be discriminated against because they're wearing their hair naturally. And so, companies like Unilever are really getting behind these initiatives. And so I do think that we're going to see that slight skew to the left. What does it mean? Well, it means how you portray your customer, how you come across and communicate in your messaging, but also how you treat your employees. And if you don't treat them well, you're going to get found out and exposed. And so I think all of this hopefully answers your question that, yeah, we're still going to be selling toothpaste and detergent and soap. But how we run our business inside and how we communicate outside are going to have to be in sync and have to be consistent.
I want to continue.
Doesn't that, can I interject for a second?
Sure,
Bob?
absolutely. Go for it.
But doesn't that, and so Joe, to that point though, if you speak to Mark, if you meet to Ivan, if you speak to anybody really in the CPG category, they've been talking about this for a long time. They've been talking about one-to-one marketing at scale, for example, but they just don't necessarily want to pay for it. I think the broader challenge with that is that it's not necessarily about the political climate. They've been trying to do that for many years. It's now just a time that they can actually amplify that. Is that more where you're kind of positioning at, or do you think that now that there's this new political agenda happened and the government will change, pandemic has allowed people to think about this differently, then suddenly they've changed? Or from all discussions I've had with the same people or heard them in the same rooms, is that Yeah, man, they've been talking about this for years. Now it's just a
I
chance
think
to be able to sort it out.
no, the phrase that you mentioned is the key phrase, at scale. And when I spoke to Manos Spanos, who runs marketing for Danone, I forget the product right now, the new brand, but I think it's called like Too Good or something like that. But they are acting like a DTC, and they're donating a percentage of proceeds from the sale of this yogurt to helping with people that are food insecure. And one statistic that I actually found out, by the way, which blew my mind, is before COVID, there were more food insecure people in the United States than there are total residents or citizens of Canada. And this was before COVID. So the at scale, I mean, listen, I can appreciate it because, the central premise of Built to Suck is that the very thing that helped these companies grow is the thing that's killing them now and strangling them, which is scale. But when a company can actually use scale to their advantage and actually be that force for good, then amazing things can happen. And I mean, honestly, I would say, by the way, Bob, not bad for two people on the show that are like, talking the hind leg off a donkey or an elephant, depending on which side.
I had no fear about having two people on this particular show. There was no fear at all.
But I think there's a red thread throughout this whole conversation for any brands that are unsure of what to do. I would say just go and look at the transcript, because I think all the nuggets and all the crumbs are there.
But that's I think these points are, though, that doesn't lean one way or the other. It's not a political agenda. This is a brand. It's a brand ethos, right? And that's my point. And that's why I said, Bob, I think they're going to fall back to habits, and those habits are based on the media, and the message is based on what that brand cares about. And institutionally, they've been trying to potentially transform for many years. This just gives them the ability to say, "Can we be heard better now?" I don't know. I think it's euphoric, but I also think, unless they transform, and I fundamentally mean transform, then I think it's harder for them to they'll just fall into bad habits, because the media doesn't change much. The message might change slightly, but unless they transform like their product, you talked about Unilever. I think they own Haagen-Dazs. They own Ben & Jerry's. They own an ice cream brand, right? So during the pandemic, as an example, it's middle of summer, people are dying for ice cream. And I don't mean dying for ice cream. How dare I? I mean, they are really willing ice cream. And Jesus, Ben and Jerry.
We'll give you a pass.
Ben and Jerry had a drone delivery service. So there, I don't think that would have been something they instigated prior to this, or as willingly, as opposed to this captive audience, because they can't necessarily launch a product, put it into market, create demand for something they can't deliver.
Well, let's take this conversation in that direction right now, because the pandemic keeps coming up, and there was an interesting Forbes article that was talking about pandemic trends that are here to stay. Now, David, the first two items are not new, but do you believe pandemic shopping has forever moved away from bricks and mortar at scale, and now we're in totally digital culture, and we're going to keep going that direction? And is it destroying brand loyalty as a result? Because now we're buying whatever's cheapest because we can compare things in a digital environment. So what do you think? I mean, is brand loyalty going away? Are bricks and mortar just going to be a specialty retail opportunity going forward as we move toward a more digital future?
Yeah, I think what you just hit on there is a couple of things. If the word at scale becomes more relevant, then yeah, we're in trouble. And I think part of that is just simply because of people's confidence in terms of this thing being around for a longest time. But it's also given people the excuse to understand that, what we see as trends that could have happened, who cares, 2 to 5 years away from now, has been accelerated to now, and have caught people off guard. And people who have been slow at doing that have outsourced that to people like Amazon, have to reorientate their business to understand how they brand build directly as opposed to using third party. So I think these more boutique pop-ups, some of the incredible luxury brands out there have been affected directly. Obviously, if you can't touch and feel the value of $3,000 leather bag, why would you ever buy it? But what they've also done is they've re-engineered spaces to do personal shopping in in really interesting locations. So it's actually heightened the hyper VIP experience as opposed to make the product feel mass. So will they be able to make that up in the margin? Maybe, but maybe they shouldn't have been a mass product anyway. I don't know, but I do think that it has allowed some brands to reorientate to say, how do we actually put service at the core of it? And this isn't necessarily new. I mean, Volvo tried something a few years ago where you're able to test drive a Volvo service, and for certain malls, they would deliver your shopping into the back of the car for you. So there's a sort of heightened concierge service. But will it happen at scale? No, because it's a challenging environment. I mean, God, how many of these shopping malls are being turned into distribution and dispatch centers for the Amazons of this world? It's challenging. It just allows people to reorientate retail in an intimate experience and not mass. I think mass is going to be a real problem. So if you remove the word at scale, then I think the conversation, Bob, gets really interesting. If we have to keep the word at scale inside this conversation, then we're in trouble.
So the boutique brands that are able to offer more of a white glove VIP experience are the ones that are in better position than the Targets and Walmarts of the world. I mean, they may not be the best examples because both of them are doing a robust digital business. But
right.
It seems to me that everybody, whether you're talking about the office worker or the company that relies on office space, or you're talking about the retailer that relies on a footprint at a local shopping mall, everybody's rethinking, do we need this space right now? Because the digital reality is just so overwhelming in the pandemic environment.
But, so 2 points. One, I would just add, I'll make the second point about real estate and footprint second, but it's not just the boutiques. It's actually a great loyalty and CRM approach in terms of, the velvet glove, the extra hygiene, the extra privacy, the extra security associated with the customers that are at a higher tier. I mean, Virgin was doing this, probably 15 years ago, where if you were flying upper class or whatever they call their highest class, you would be able to check in privately at your own entrance. And the limo would pull up, I think there was a car service, and you'd be able to go right through security. Even if you think about business class or first class, it takes on a whole new meaning now in a post-COVID world, where you're now maybe a little happier to pay for the fact that you're not crammed, in the middle seat between two different people. So there's that aspect of it where Hyatt, just to stay with the airline industry for a moment. I wouldn't know because I haven't flown since March, but it might just be the fact that when you fly, if you're Executive Platinum on American, you get a free COVID test that you for peace of mind or whatever the case may be, or maybe other people are paying for it. But I think with respect to real estate, I might repeat something that I've said in a previous show, but a lot of people say COVID created, this digital transformation, chief transformation officer. It didn't. It was digital catch-up. It was digital acceleration. That's all.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It didn't invent this. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. It's accelerated companies' demise, or it has accelerated their catch-up. And in the case of real estate, these, does bricks and mortar have a place in this new world? Of course it does.
Yes.
But Barnes and Noble could be half the size and be as effective and certainly more efficient. And I think, for me, this is just a big giant real estate play post-COVID, whether we're looking at malls, parking lots, Targets or any other, mom and pop store. Do we need all of that real estate? And the answer is going to be no. And if we do, then the landlords are going to have to come to the party. Otherwise, the bottom's going to fall out of the model.
Yeah, look, and I would also say it's not just about navel gazing US either. So if you were to go to places like Asia pre this time, it's things like shopping malls are absolutely taking off. They're doing a counter of what you're seeing in the US. So the demise of these is not new. It's just the way they transform, right? So it is. I completely agree. There's a brand new cultural change that's been accelerated and just brought forward. And you can't stuff that genie back in the bottle. So these direct relationships that people like Unilever are building and P&Gs of this world, they just need to figure it out. It's just harder for them though, because people like, Target and Walmart have done a great job of trying to get it together. They're trying to compete against people like Amazon, but a lot of this real estate is going to be re-engineered for things like clearinghouses and distribution points, etc. A lot of these corporate buildings, I hope, in these cities that are becoming a bit sort of wary, will hopefully become cultural arts centers or something that feels like you can bring culture back into these cities that feel like they're homogenized. So that's where I'm sort of sitting with this real estate space.
And there's another trend they mentioned in the article that seems kind of obvious, but it does impact us more than I think we're giving credit for it. Sustainability and hygiene are such a big deal right now. I mean, are they here to stay, and how does this impact what marketers do? Joe, any thoughts on that? I mean, does sustainability and hygiene play such a massive role in our psyche at this point that it's going to be a trend that continues for the next year, 2 years, 3 years?
Well, I'll start off with hygiene. I mean, hygiene is to COVID what TSA was to 9/11. It's
that's a
just
good
here
analogy.
to stay. It's just here to stay, and what seems abnormal and unusual now will just become obvious. And that may include mask wearing at certain times. And at some point, it's just, how many kids, unfortunately, are being born into this world and growing up just thinking that this is how life, this is how life works. As far as sustainability is concerned, there's going to be a short-term pain and maybe a longer-term pleasure. So things that are discarded now, single-use items are not going to probably be brilliant for the environment in terms of throwing things away, not using them again. But there'll be eventually some kind of solution, and some entrepreneur and corporations will figure that out too, in terms of how to recognize that we may not be able to reuse certain items, many items, but not have to further destroy the world in the process. So that's how I see those two.
It's interesting you should talk about that with I would just call it this kind of clumsy ethics. Prior to, I think at the end of last year, we felt like climate change was such a big deal. Sustainability was such a big deal. People like Greta got lots of airtime, and rightfully so, and the ocean's boiling and the temperatures are rising and all of these things. And then in moments, a pandemic happens, which brings all of that future to the forefront of your door in moments. And we're not going to touch something unless it has wrapped 6 times in single-use plastic, or wearing 3-layered masks that ultimately end up in the ocean, that ends up in the food chain, that cannot be bloody disposed of, by the way. This stuff's going to sit in landfill forever. So you look at that and think, when you talk about that gain, Joe, I love that point of saying short-term pain for long-term gain. I hope so, but we'll see if it happens en masse. I'm half Chinese, so I've been traveling for the last 10 years with a mask on when I go on a plane, so I don't look so crazy. When I see white people with a mask on, it's hilarious. But it's now become, but now it's kind of it's such commonplace, right? That it becomes this habit. But the ability to say, okay, if this is going to be consistently here for the longest term now, then there will be some beautiful engineering that will change and help make sure that is sustainable. Because I think sustainability is the core of it completely. And some of that can also happen in things like luxury fashion brands. I don't know kind of why I'm thinking about them more tonight, but the idea of saying it's not about fast fashion, it's about making sure you buy something that can be reused constantly. And there's something about that makes me feel like, oh, I'm comforted by that. I'm comforted by that, saying if I'm going to spend big on this, maybe there's a reason why it's going to comfort me for a long time. I just think it's a really interesting time for people to reset their ethics and get them in place and stabilize them, because it's hard to be able to talk about pushing products if you're also not caring about the environment and how people are going to dispose of it. And a lot of people have been struggling with this for many years, because we were sold on the fact that plastics are going to sort of revolutionize the world. But, I read something like only 7% of plastics in the world have been recycled. That's a lot that's happened, man.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, there's one last trend I want to get to before we move on, and that's the idea of the crib economy. The idea that we've made such a we've had to stay home for so much of this year, and we've invested in that space more than ever. If we're not able to go on vacation, we're redoing our lawn. If we're into watching movies, we buy ourselves home video equipment so that we can have a better theater experience in our home. So is this crib economy something that's going to continue to grow and flourish in the coming days, or is it something that will eventually fade away, as does the virus, we hope? Nobody wants to tackle this one.
No, I'll take a swing at it first, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I do think that I think it's here to stay. And particularly in America, where if you think about it, there are two things for me. Fashion in America is not fashion. It's food. And if you don't believe that, turn on the telly. There's a whole channel that you have on there called the Food Network, and those guys are just jumping out food 24/7. Couple more flips of the dial, apparently, and you've got these things where it's all about interiors. So not only will it, I believe, will stay in a way that people are looking at the domestic space because they're spending more time in it. So there's a power to that, right? But it's also challenging because, let's think about it. There's four dynamics. Firstly, if you are unable to go anywhere and you have kids and you have a spouse, then you're going to have to deal with how am I getting enough time for my spouse? How am I getting enough time together as a relationship? How am I making sure I'm getting enough time with my kids if I'm having to homeschool them? Outside of that, how am I enjoying them? And then how am I getting enough time for myself? And a lot of that myself stuff probably happened in the workplace. And if that workplace is now in your living room and you're no longer working from home, you're basically, your work is your home. How are you going to actually create that mental separation if you can't constantly go outside? So I do think it's a re-engineering of how you're going to think, how you're going to divide your time, and how you're going to work. And what that means in terms of re-engineering a space, I don't think that's going to go away. I think people are going to spend more time looking at these projects. And one that gives me faith about that, so outside of physical interior design or all of these young companies that are trying to create these AR experiences behind Zoom backgrounds, because not everybody's space is delicious. So they've got these incredible backgrounds that allow you to be able to feel like you're somewhere else. So your transportation mentally can happen over Zoom calls, which is kind of depressing. But okay.
Yes, it is.
But the flip side of that is, if you look at the middle of this time in Corona, it's people have taken on things like baking in a way that's really interesting, like sourdough clubs and things that are really kind of old school, of the earth, are here to create that thing that comes back to me every time I think about this, is in its comfort, right? And it's not just that, it's not just baking, which is how humans, I think, were domesticated, because you have to grow wheat to be able to harvest it, to be able to bake bread. So that's why we stopped traveling, be nomadic. But it turns out that putting your hands in soil is a natural antidepressant. So there are some things about just the human condition can be recentered if you give it time to be able to breathe. And maybe, given this unique opportunity, you'll reorientate your crib to be something that feels more culturally in touch with where you want to go. So why wouldn't you want to continue doing that? Anyway, that's how I'm thinking about it, Bob.
It makes sense. Makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I don't love the word crib economy. I'm like, come on, enough. We've got the experiential economy, the entertainment economy, so I don't like the crib economy at all. I do think, though, that we may very well just, this is not a revolutionary thought, but we may very well end up with a 4-day work week, or at least 4 days in the office and 3 days at home. And homes are going to have to be built and retrofitted as well. Things like building, just like a green screen into a home office, or being able to. I mean, it's almost like the those images of small little apartments where the bed folds into the wall. So we're going to see these kind of hybrid functions where a normal room can be turned into a home office, etc. But do I think, faith, is faith popcorn right now going, told you so, we're all cocooning? I just didn't realize it was because of COVID, maybe. But I think it's just, sanity will prevail, and we'll start to see other trends, like, for example, anyone who, Shingy, you probably use the LIRR, I use Metro North. I mean, these trains are just horrible. The air conditioning or the heat doesn't work half the time. There's no Wi-Fi. They even took out the bar car, for God's sake. So if we are going to be commuting from our crib, let's make that more enjoyable and pleasurable and productive. And when we are at home, there are going to be some small changes and ultimately big changes in terms of, as I said, how homes are built that will leverage this new reality. But let's just not call it a flippant economy, shall we?
I think that's I would join you in. We're good without another whole.
Yeah, we don't need another economy.
Feels like renovate the space you're in to make yourself feel like you're productive and wonderful. Because at the end of the day, the re-engineering of your own thinking, to reset this, to not spend any time in commute, and to time shift your hours, to be able to take calls while at the kitchen counter when your kids are running around. These things seemed really kind of off a while ago, but are now just the norm. Mm-hmm. So, companies are also embracing those ethics and saying, hey, yeah, look, guess what? I think it was Xerox, one of the largest employers, certainly in Europe, in the tech community, said it's not about the work hour days, it's about the time. So if you need to shift the time to get the work done, that's awesome. But we're not going to create these standard structures. These standard structures are really just a hierarchy that conforms to say this is what we want to do. We want people to be available 9 till 6. Well, that's not really that normal anyway. So I think the real challenge is, regardless of how beautiful you make it, it's the separation of work and home that needs to be. That's more of a mental separation than a physical separation. So we have to work at that as much as the actual physical manifestation of, re-engineering your basement to feel like it's going to be a ripper of an office space. I mean, I think at the end of the day, look at somebody like, Jeremiah. I think we all know Jeremiah. He works out of an Airstream. That's his office. I think there are ways that people can actually separate their space physically on their own property, perhaps, but it's the mental separation, I think, is the biggest issue that needs to work, less the spatial issues. But I do think the DIY, the experts, the engineering of digital cultures to make you feel like you can transport, that's all going to continue. But we're not working on the mental health issue of it.
Well, we got to wrap.
I just want to add one more thing, which is
are so behind.
Sorry,
it's okay. Just skip one of the topics you don't like. But you during this time of COVID, it was cute, and it still is to a degree cute, where the little kid runs in and the dog barks. I mean, mine was barking a short while ago downstairs, and I mean, I'm not even talking about being, about tubining or anything like that. I'm just talking about the fact that it was kind of cutesy, like all this awkwardness. But moving forward, there's going to need to be a new professionalism about working at home. And another of these implications is going to be soundproofing. So, I mean, if you're in the soundproofing business right now, or, invest in, you're in for a rip-roaring time. And if you're looking to invest in a company that does soundproofing, because you're going to need to be able to take these calls and meetings and Teams and whatever you call it. And it's not going to be okay to hear all the noise and the distraction moving forward. So that's a very, I think, practical implication of what this new environment or reality is going to look like or sound like.
We all know that's not new, though, mate. How many conference calls have you been on? Let's forget video for a moment, where it's like, hey, man, whoever's clacking at the keyboard, please stop that. I don't know whose dog is barking. Could you please go on mute? Can everybody know it's star 61 to actually speak if you want to speak? I read a thing a few years ago from Microsoft.
It's all video now.
These guys published it and said, there's something like 12. It takes 12 minutes for every conference call to get aligned, and before it actually starts on. So we waste a lot of time. But so I agree with you, but those conditions don't necessarily go away. When it comes to video, that's where I think the AR development that's been happening is really interesting, because not only can you transform your space, you could be in any space. The sound thing, completely agree. However, at least the visual component of that is potentially being retrofitted to be at least newer in its take. I think mic technologies is going to be something that has to be picked up on, less about sort of soundproofing your house. It's more about better pickup technology mics and things that actually allow you to have condenser sounds and, blocking out
so
the rest. I don't know.
People will negotiate into their contract, which is, listen, 13 check is fine and 401k, but I need a Yeti blue mic. Otherwise, it's a deal breaker.
And install my green screen today. Hey, there's a couple more topics I want to get to, and I'm going to get to them real quick because we don't have a lot of time. But the first one is the virus is surging here in the U.S. You see the news. It's really at incredible levels at this point. And discussion is already starting about a total lockdown coming this winter. It's becoming more and more a reality. David, how should brands prepare now for a seeming inevitability of everything shutting down once again and us having to go through this?
Well, I'm hoping that brands who've already re-engineered the way that they think will just understand it needs to be more of that. And what do I mean by that? I mean, the problem with most media planning, most messaging, it's already been in play, right? And so when this happened, they're like, oh, wow, what do we do? Put on the brakes, put up a PSA ad that sounds like it all comes from the same agency, all the 100+ ads that rolled around. And, they just bunkered down and try and think about how they can change. How they need to work with their agency partners, etc. If they haven't changed the way that they brief and the way that they think about their brand in real time and the way that they think about open creativity, if they haven't done any of that, to be frank, Bob, that they're already going to be left behind.
Yeah, and good point.
And it really is it's less about what they talk about in the media and what they put out there, to be frank. It's about how they're re-engineering the way that they're actually doing their intake. Because if they don't do that right, you end up with the bloody Gap sweater, dude. And that is just, in my mind, crazy. So, I'm hoping that they re-engineer the way that they intake, the way they brief, the way they actually allow things to happen. Stop outsourcing, do a lot of stuff internally, make sure if it starts to work and it looks like it becomes contagious in their minds, and they amplify it through traditional media partners. So I imagine that's part of the transformation that they hope they do, Bob. It's got to be about change. If they don't do it now, then they're just going to get lost in the woods anyway.
Good points. And the last topic I wanted to touch on real briefly, hotel brands and their continuing effort to combat the impact of the pandemic are now all getting behind this new strategy of the hotel as office positioning. It seems to be working to an extent. But I wonder, Joe, what are the strengths as well as the potential pitfalls here? I mean, we talk about travel as if it's something that's not going to come back for a while. But if you can work from anywhere, doesn't this make sense? And isn't this a strong positioning for them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's actually in fact, it's not a new idea. This very same idea or derivations of this idea are ideas, strategies that I personally have been involved in with clients in the past. And I'm not talking about like last year. I'm talking about 5, 6, 7 years ago, about thinking about smart ways to pivot new use cases for hotels, even conference rooms, even conference rooms in the Admirals Club, quite frankly, when you think about travel, being able to take a meeting from LaGuardia because it's actually geographically convenient to do so, and figuring that out. But, there was a startup, I forget the name, that they're probably still around, where you could actually rent out a hotel room by the hour. And obviously, I know, you and your one-track minds, the listeners of the BeanCast, what you're thinking.
I was thinking it. I was there. I'll admit it.
But it was actually positioned. I mean, maybe there was the obvious use case, but the idea was like a place to crash for 2 hours or an hour in between meetings, to be able to, to have a shower or to, or to take a conference call. I mean, if you think about us being nomads as entrepreneurs, as consultants, as freelancers, or just being between meetings on a business trip. So they're all grounded in the reality of excess supply. And now with COVID, it becomes a much, much bigger opportunity. I was thinking about, the other day that if you think about, for anyone that actually has flown recently, even international trips, you don't actually need to book business class or first class because you're pretty much going to get the entire row to yourself. So you're going to get a flat bed no matter where you are. So while we attempt to get back to some kind of equilibrium, the ability to think about how we use and exist, new use cases or applications for business models that could very well actually take on permanence, make a lot of sense. And this one, hotel as office, of course, why not? Why not?
Well, I hope they can transform fast enough, because if you think about the way that they have re-engineered and redesigned hotels to suit an audience that doesn't like, for example, mini bars and room service, and they have communal kitchens, I mean, they're going to have to re-engineer those things pretty quickly. So it'll be amazing to see if they're actually able to retrograde.
And again, I mean, just to add two aspects. One, we've discussed today, being able to include green screens in a hotel room, for example, and better lighting, and have a Yeti Blue mic. These are all absolutely aspects now that just connect the dots and say, well, if it's going to be in your crib at home, it may as well be at your crib on the road.
Yeah, good points all.
Yeah.
Well, with that, it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Joe Jaffe. You can find him at jaffejuice.tv. That'll take you to the YouTube page. You're also at coronatv.com, is that it?
coronatv.show.
Corona.tv.show. You've got a number of websites. I'll let you take us through that. But tell us what's going on in your world. What would you like to promote?
Yeah, well, the show Corona TV in December will move to 12 noon Eastern Standard Time in an effort to just really kind of dovetail with lunch and lunch hour. And the show is 12 to 1, and then 1 to 1:30 is the Zoom after show. Every Friday in December is actually going to be now a community show. So myself plus 9 previous guests, so 10 of us. Can you imagine that? Imagine how much we talked today with just the 2 of us and a moderator. Try and do that with 10. And then, of course, one of the highlights in December is going to be Shingy is going to be a guest on the show. He doesn't know it yet, but I've just invited him. So I'm excited about that. But the real thing that I actually just wanted to plug is the panel picker for South by Southwest 2021 opens up November 10th to November 20th. And I was meant to present this year, which obviously didn't happen. And instead of pitching the same concept, I pitched something completely new. It may be the first time I actually deliver this. It's called How I Reinvented Myself During a Global Pandemic, and You Can Too. And I'm just going to basically tell the story of Corona TV and pretty much share everything that I did right, wrong, and open up, the kimono, which is tell people what software I use, what mics I use, give them everything, give them the keys to the kingdom. If they want to do it, let them do it. Full transparency. And so if you're planning on coming to South by Southwest and you want to attend my session, or you want to see that my session happens, please vote for me. Just go to the panel picker, and it opens up, as I said, November 10th to November 20th.
Fantastic. That's a great one. It lets us know a lot about what's going on in your life. Tell us, David. Let me go back here. David Shing. You can find him at shingy.com. That's the website portal that gives you entry into the Shingy world. But tell us what's going on in your world, David. What would you like to promote?
Well, there's 2 things. Clearly, I'm going to be on Joe's wonderful show in December. Now he's got me on record. I'm definitely going to come along and say what's up. But also, I'll be panel picking you for sure, my brother. But there are a couple of things that I've actually reinstigated. I do Shingerviews, which are these interviews with people that I think are really kind of interesting, and they're shot really well, and you can see those. a couple of them hanging off my website. So I've started doing those back again, and I'll let you know when I've got a couple more. But I've also started back with 1111s. So I used to do these things when I traveled a lot back. Remember 6 months ago when we used to get on a plane and travel? Well, those days are well over. But I used to do these things where I'd go and pick a place at 11 o'clock, and I'd invite 5 people, or the first people to respond would turn up and bring somebody. So I'd end up with, and I'd be the 11th guest. So 11 at 11. And I've started to do those virtually, where I just have these conversations with people that are sort of very small, intimate conversations, which have allowed me to listen and also allowed me to be a student, and I adore them. So if you want to join those, just ping me and we'll see if I can get that happening. But the other thing, Bob, frankly, what I've been up to is just thinking about what's going to happen in a world of contactless contact. What's going to happen with some of these technologies we've already engineered, and how do we think about that? And Flowcode is doing advanced QR, which is Tim Armstrong's startup. I'm helping him out creatively there, which has been really interesting for me. But at the same time, I've been cherry picking some brands to work with that are really more around the D2C space, both physically and digitally, just to be able to understand how it culminates at a time like this. And I've just found it to be really refreshing. So it's less about me amplifying what I'm up to and more about rolling my sleeves up and enjoying that. However, I did do a course that's about to be launched at the end of this year, which is about to be an entrepreneur, which is a bit different than an entrepreneur, as I've discussed in the past many times. But I'm actually giving away all the IP around that and understanding how people can become entrepreneurs inside a company, which I think is more important today than ever before.
Well, that's really fascinating. I'll have to check that out. That's some really great content. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. And of course, you can even find out how to advertise on this program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, I was going to talk about the BK UK urging, meaning Burger King UK urging people to eat at McDonald's. I thought that was really clever and really well positioned, talking about the entire industry and saying support restaurants, whether they're chains or local, you should be out supporting them. I thought that was really good. But I'm going to give the fair this week to the clever trolls who set up a fake Stop the Steal page on Facebook. Now, if you don't know what the Stop the Steal pages are, Stop the Steal is a hashtag movement about Trump supporters who believe that the election was stolen. And these trolls set up a fake Stop the Steal page that attracted 30,000 viewers, and then they changed the name, Joe, to Gay Communists for Socialism. And what made it even better was that when people started complaining and getting upset about it, they convinced people that this was really a stealth campaign so that we wouldn't get taken down and that you all should just stay quiet and keep doing your thing while we call ourselves, fill this with all this communist, rhetoric and socialist rhetoric and gay propaganda. So I don't know about you, Joe, but for me, this was just the ultimate in great marketing.
And then in the biggest controversy of all, they convinced them that the whole cancel culture movement had taken the word gullible out of the English dictionary. So, can you imagine the outrage? Those gay communists for socialism,
Really, really great. Well, the fail of this week goes to UK department store Marks and Spencer, who tried to create a portmanteau for their new holiday treat, asking, who wants a bite of Santa's Yum Nuts? I don't know, David, I heard this, and the comments were fantastic. A Yum Nut is basically a donut that has a Santa buckle going across it. But, my favorite comment, I think, was somebody said, somebody really should have said this out loud before they wrote it down.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's almost like it's almost like M&S trying to deal with with Ansell's incredible success with the cronut, but it's clearly not going to work. I saw that along the way earlier this week and thought, oh my gosh, talk about it's the same guys that worked for Gap decided to switch over to M&S. But the comment that I thought was really good is that M&S are just a second away from calling themselves S&M. And if you look at the design of the donut, it's not even that special. So I just thought it was completely. It's okay if you're going to be ironic. KFC a couple of years ago had a bad PR stunt where they. Not a stunt, I'm sorry. They had a bad PR blitz where they changed logistics companies and they couldn't get chickens delivered to their restaurants. And, being the UK and being sort of that dry Commonwealth, they came out with this beautiful PR piece that just said FCK. And I just thought that was really genius of them because it was ironic. But, it's okay if you can get away with it and you properly understand where you are as a brand. But M&S to do that crazy Santa nut thing is just, it's so lost to me, man. I just thought it was a donk.
It was really funny. Well, the foul of this week I'm giving to something that we've already discussed ad nauseum, so I'm not sure what you guys can add to it, but I'm going to leave it out there. Gap obviously did not listen to last week's show where we talked about this extensively, how you should avoid just taking that kind of vanilla position and try to make everybody love you in the process of everybody hating each other. But they tried to market a red and blue sided hoodie. Anything more you guys want to add to this?
I mean, other than what we discussed? No,
I don't think so.
I think they deserve the final word.
Well, have a suggestion.
I think they should produce the sweater and they should see if it sells. And when it does sell out, see if it burns on the streets and all those things that they didn't expect to happen. And they should use it as contagious content. But on a serious note, I think they should actually listen to Joe and actually give 50-50 of the dividends away to both sides. Yeah.
Well, have a suggestion for this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag #FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C-Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Excuse me? I hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly.
What did you say? What did I miss?
Yeah, what's the excuse me for?
Oh, you didn't hear it? I belched. I think it caught it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, it's like it just.
I didn't hear it.
Yeah, you probably wouldn't hear it over Skype, but I think the mic definitely picked it up.
No, I swear I didn't hear a thing.
I didn't hear it either.
Yeah, it's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.